I should start from employment levels and policy and labor market institutions. So, employment levels and labor market. A strict connection can be detected, especially in the European context, between the abandonment over the last 30 years of demand management policies aimed at high employment and their progressive relaxation of so-called labor market rigidities, from collective bargaining arrangements and inclusive wage-setting institutions to employment protection legislation, from legal views concerning hiring, dismissing and working hours to various forms of insurance against unemployment. The point is that such benign labor market institutions are hardly viable and conceivable in the absence of policies persistently oriented towards full employment. Indeed, capitalism is ultimately incompatible with an advanced wage earners protecting set of institutions if an economic policy is lacking which aims at neutralizing the market's incapacity to ensure adjustment of effective to potential output. Even in the face of rises in demand, firms do not hire if they are not free to dismiss at will, not to choose whom and how to hire, unless, in the light of actual experience, they can reasonably count upon a stable growth of the demand for their products and hence of their activity levels. Benign labor market institutions and an advanced wage earners protection legislation were possible and did spread in Europe over the first 30 years following World War II, because the awareness was then diffused among employers that the economic policy's primary objective was the maintenance of high levels of employment, in turn regarded by governments over those 3 decades as indispensable for social stability. The second set of linkages on which I would like to draw your attention are those between employment levels and policies and the welfare state. That is, indirect and deferred wages. Historical record of advanced capitalism over the last 60 years, entire post-war period, reveals also the existence, I believe, of significant interconnections between the general state of employment and that portion of wage earners' living standard which is determined by some relevant components of public spending: health, pensions, education, transports and residential constructions, as well as by the forms of taxation. Especially in Europe, the development of the welfare state was an outstanding aspect of incomes policies, of the so-called social pact or exchange. It was a question of obtaining that, in spite of persistently low levels of unemployment and strengthened relations consequently favorable to wage earners, rises in money wages occurred as much as possible within the limits set by rises in productivity, so as not to jeopardize the profitability of private investment or hamper the competitivity of domestic production. In practice, through the development of the welfare state, strong wage earners' bargaining powers resulted in large measure in the expansion of collective services rather than impinging directly upon business income and the profitability of capital. But as unemployment started rising at the end of the 70s and unions' bargaining power became increasingly weaker, also the preservation of a generous but fiscally onerous welfare state, fiscally onerous for the wealthier sections of the population, started being regarded as increasingly less necessary. It can therefore be affirmed, in the light of actual experience, that rises in unemployment that remain policy unchecked or a positively deflationary policy stance not only tend to cause wages to increase systematically less than productivity, but are also accompanied by reductions in social spending and the overall progressivity of tax systems, as well as by increases in the incidence of levies on labor income. Naturally, in this case too, the process tends to feed upon itself. Both the reduced tax progressivity and meager social spending exert a negative impact on aggregate demand and employment. To the extent to which less social spending is matched by more private spending on health, pensions, education, etc., household income available for other expenditures results correspondingly reduced. The third set of interconnections on which I would like to draw attention is that between employment levels and policies and economic globalization. In the 3 decades following the Bretton Woods Agreement, great attention was dedicated by the governments of the major capitalist countries within the framework of their full employment policies to the economic and social relationships with the rest of the world and to balance of payments constraints on growth. In those years, a significant component part of national full employment policies was represented by various forms of regulation of foreign trade, severe immigration policies, and, most importantly, by capital controls. Indeed, Article 6 of the IMF agreement had accorded to every member government the explicit right to control all capital movements and contemplated even the possibility of requiring member countries using the resources of the fund to exercise the control of the outflow of capital. Quoting from Section 1 of the Article 6 of the agreement, if, after receiving such a request, a member fails to exercise appropriate controls, the fund may declare the members ineligible to use the general resources of the fund. And Keynes would thus state in London before the House of Lords what in the pre-war period was regarded as heresy in the field of capital movement is now endorsed as orthodox. Starting from the abandonment of full employment as the primary policy objective at the end of the 70s, national economies were exposed to a strong acceleration of the internationalization process involving each one of its main dimensions: trade, immigration, and capital mobility. This acceleration has played the most relevant role in the change in distribution experienced by the USA and Europe over the last 3 decades. I have already made referenceable to the process of deindustrialization brought about by the rise in trade from low-wage developing countries, as well as by increasing flows of investment in plant and equipment to them. This process has affected wage earners' bargaining power, both in the USA and in Europe, through its impact on the level and composition of output, through the pressure exerted on money wages by decreasing international prices of an increasing number of consumption goods and their inputs, and through the mere threat of production relocations, a threat rendered entirely credible by those already occurred thanks to the new regime of full capital mobility. Now, it is worth stressing that, especially in Europe, the free mobility of capital has affected distribution also through the loss of the possibility of governing domestic interest rates. By giving up capital controls, the level of interest rate is ultimately dictated to a country by the objective of checking flows of funds incompatible with the exchange rate policy and regime chosen by its authorities. Now, this loss of national monetary sovereignty is likely to bring about also loss of budgetary sovereignty, of the freedom of each nation, that is to say, to decide the level and composition of its public expenditures, as well as the forms of taxation. Thus, having disposed of the possibility of acting upon interest rates, in the face of interest rates higher than the rates of growth of output, governments anxious about checking the rise in the ratio of public debt to gross domestic output will necessarily aim at the formation of primary surpluses, which had to be the higher relative to GDP, the higher interest rates, and the accumulated stock of debt happened to be. And since the free mobility of capital compels also to avoid measures capable of causing its flight, a capital-friendly taxation system becomes a must, so that by far the most relevant role in the budgetary stringency